Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Okay, so this video I'm going to go over a few things on the autopsy. I did a live, I think it was a few weeks ago, a week or so ago, going through a few things. And then if you remember, I said I was going to talk to my doctor friend and ask her some questions, and I was able to talk to her. Dr. Amy Solano is her name. She's actually going to come on sometime here soon and kind of go more in depth with the autopsy results. But I was able to ask her a few of my questions, some of the quick, simple questions that we were wondering about on the last live. So I'm going to go through some of that. So first of all, I want to clear something up. I was actually wrong about one of the things where I just misread this part here. I'll show you here. So basically it's about, there's a creator that was saying that because Shanann didn't have this reference note on her autopsy like Bella and Cece did, that meant that her BAC, her blood alcohol concentration, was not from decomposition, because if it was, then it would have it would have had this reference note, basically, is what she was saying. But there's a few things wrong about that. First of all, it does have the reference note as far as the decomposition note. All three of them have it. But you'll see here, this is Shanann's right here. And then here's the reference note. Okay, so I'm going to highlight the main part that I want to point out, but I'll read the whole note. Okay, so here's the note that I'm referring to. And I think either the other creator is referring to this note, which she must have missed because it is under Shanann's, or she's referring to this other note, which we'll talk about too. So, okay, so I highlighted the part about the decomposition, but let me read the whole thing. So it says ethanol, ethyl alcohol, spleen blood, ethyl alcohol. Ethanol, drinking alcohol, is a central nervous system depressant and can cause effects such as impaired judgment, reduced alertness, and impaired muscular coordination. Ethanol can also be a product of decomposition or degradation of biological samples. The blood alcohol concentrations BAC can be expressed as a whole number with the units of milligram per deciliter, or as a decimal number with units of grams per 100 milliliters, which is equivalent to weight volume percentage. For example, a BAC of 85 milligrams per deciliter equals 0.085 grams per 100 milliliters, or 85% weight volume of ethanol. Okay, so we do see, if that's what she's talking about, there is a note, okay, and I'll show you there's a note under all of them. Okay, so here's Bella's right here, and you'll see she has a note, the same note. Okay, so here's Bella's. It says the same thing. Ethanol alcohol, blah, blah, blah. And then ethanol can also be a product of decomposition or degradation of biological samples. And then Cece's has the same thing. I'll show you. And I'm the one that highlighted that part, so it's pointed out so you guys see where I'm reading. But yeah, right here. So this is Cece's. Ethanol can also be a product of decomposition or degradation of biological samples. Okay, so we have that. So that is under all three. So either she didn't see that of Shanann's, or she must not be talking about that note. Maybe she's not talking about that note. So I went through, and here's another one right here too. Ethanol can also be a product of, right there, because they got spleen blood and liver tissue from Cece. So it says both levels of ethanol, which you could see ethanol, and then 31, because they took it from the spleen and the liver tissue. Okay, so they're saying both of them, the ethanol levels of the spleen blood and the liver tissue, can be a product of decomposition or degradation of biological samples. So it's just pointing that out. Okay, and that's why it's in there twice, not because it's more likely that that's the cause of Cece's levels. It's because it's two different things. It's for the spleen blood and liver tissue, okay? And we know with Shanann, they only took the spleen blood for some reason. I know that's not right. They shouldn't have. They should have taken more. They should have taken blood from other areas, but they didn't. So we got to go with what we have, which we only have the spleen blood. Okay, so now The only other thing that I could think that maybe she was talking about, because as far as the only other note that talks about the levels of ethanol being for a specific reason other than drinking, we have this note right here, which is actually only under cc's. I'll highlight it. Okay. And this is the one that I didn't read it right, and I basically didn't understand it right because I wasn't reading it right. Because once I was talking to Amy and we were going through it, and then she explained it, I was like, oh yeah, that's what it says. I was reading it all wrong. So it says the concentration of ethanol increased from 99 milligrams per 100 grams to 174 milligrams per 100 grams over the course of multiple analyses. The nature of the specimen and or the container type, which may not contain preservative, may explain the variable quantitative results. So originally I thought they were talking about the container that they were transported in, but I didn't read it close enough because it says the concentration of ethanol increased over the course of multiple analyses, like they were analyzing the blood or the tissue. And it looks like here, see comment, that's actually the tissue, but either or, I understood it wrong. So basically what it's saying is whatever container that they had the tissue in when they were testing it, it wasn't preserved. So therefore, between analysis, as time passed, the ethanol increased because the decomposition increased, in which it would increase the ethanol, at least for a period. So between analysis, from one test to the next, it actually increased. So he was making a note because somebody might look at that and like, wow, how did that increase? You tested it one time and then the next time it's higher. Why isn't this accurate? Well, he was just explaining that over the time that it took from the first analysis to the next analysis, since it wasn't preserved, it's an explanation for why that happened. Why did it increase? So that's all that is. They're explaining it. So the reason there's no notes under Shanann's or Bella's is because that didn't happen for them. When they tested it, it didn't increase. So they didn't have to explain what the situation is. And plus they didn't even take the liver tissue from Shanann. But it's besides the point that if they didn't need to put a no if it didn't happen, why would they even need to have explained it? Because if it didn't happen when they were testing Shanann's spleen blood, or maybe they didn't test it twice like they did cc's, plus it was Shanann's spleen blood and not liver tissue like cc's was, at least that specific specimen they're talking about with that comment is liver tissue. So if that specific situation didn't happen when they were testing Shanann's spleen blood, then why would there need to be a note under Shanann's autopsy results? It's just specific to the situation that happened with cc's liver tissue sample. That's it. It only happened with cc's. Whether that be because it was the liver tissue and with Shanann wasn't it, or because they didn't test Shanann's twice like that, or whatever the reason being, the whole point of the note is to explain why between the testing from one test to the next, why the ethanol increased in cc's. That's the whole point of the note. So if it didn't happen in Shanann's like that, why would they even have put a note under Shanann's like that? That has nothing to do with Shanann's ethanol being a result of decomposition. Those two have nothing to do with each other. There is a note under Shanann's autopsy that does say that the ethanol elevation could be from decomposition and degradation. They all say that. This specific note for Cece is only because when they tested her liver tissue twice, the second time they tested it, so basically they had her liver tissue in a container, is a sample, right? They tested it once, it came out at one result. And when they retested it, it was actually higher than the first test result. So they're just explaining why that could have possibly happened. That's all. It doesn't mean that Shanann's ethanol levels can't be a result of decomposition. I mean, one doesn't have anything to do with the other. So I don't understand where that relation is that she's trying to point out? I mean, what does that have to do with the possibility that Shanann's ethanol levels are high due to decomposition? I don't get that. If anything, that shows that, wow, decomposition does and can raise the ethanol levels. You see it right there in action. So if anything, it goes for the argument. I wanted to clear that up because I was wrong. So I was wrong as far as what I thought this was saying, but I was right in the fact that this note has nothing to do with whether or not they thought Shanann's BAC was from decomposition. So those are the only two notes I could see that say anything about elevated ethanol levels. So I'm not sure what she's talking about, but so basically, to sum that up, if she was saying that Shanann didn't have this note, she does have this note in her autopsy notes. They all three do. The note that says ethanol can also be a product of decomposition or degradation of biological samples. And if it's this note she's talking about, it's because this has only happened with CC. In between testing, the ethanol level increased between testing. So they were just explaining why that could have happened, because it wasn't preserved. And basically, what I'm guessing is because since it wasn't preserved, that natural process of decomposition, like we see here, was at play here. So the more time, it was increasing the alcohol level. So I'll show you again that Shanann's does have that note, at least with the decomposition note. Here's Bella's. Bella has her note, and then, but Bella doesn't have that note as far as the increase in between analyses, because it didn't happen with hers. And maybe it's because, like I said, that was from Cece's liver tissue, and they didn't take Bella's liver tissue. They took her chest cavity blood. So this is another issue. Well, they did take her liver tissue too, but as far as testing for the ethanol, it wasn't for Bella. They used her chest cavity for the ethanol test. For Cece, they used the liver tissue and the spleen blood, and then for Shanann, they used the spleen blood. And maybe the reason that it didn't happen to the other ones, like I said, is because the ethanol was being tested in the liver tissue, and with Bella's, the ethanol is tested in the chest cavity blood, and then with Shanann's, it's the spleen blood, which is another thing that Dr. Solano brought up, is you can't even compare these three tests of anything because they're all taken from different sources. So they're not even really comparable. So you see the ethanol level is tested through her Bella's chest cavity blood, and then with Cece's is tested two different spots. I'll show you again. It's the liver tissue and I think it's the spleen blood. I'll show you here. So yeah, with Cece's, it's the spleen blood and then the liver tissue. And then it says C comment because that's that comment that we just read, which is down here. Here we go. That comment of why in between analyses that it went up, actually. So yeah, liver tissue. So they took for her ethanol, like I said, spleen blood and liver tissue. And with Bella's, they took the ethanol levels using the chest cavity blood here. And then with Shanann's, they took the spleen blood. Right here. Ethanol, blood alcohol, spleen blood. Okay, and yeah, hers does have the note right here. Ethanol can also be a product of decomposition or degradation of biological samples. So that's that. But yeah, so like I said, what Dr. Solano was saying, that's just weird. Why didn't they test more areas? Like they should have took the vitreous, she said, from the eyeball. That blood is the most accurate, she said. So, which they didn't with Shanann. They only took the spleen blood. And with Bella, they took, like I said, the chest cavity blood, but also vitreous fluid and liver tissue. So they did take liver tissue. but that's not where they took the ethanol level. That was through the chest cavity blood. But they did take liver tissue, and they took vitreous fluid. And then let's go back. Let's look down to CC's real quick. And CC's, they did the spleen blood and then the liver tissue. And this just says fluid. I don't know if it's the vitreous fluid for this too or not, but peripheral fluid. So is that? I'm not sure if that is. No, because it said the gray top tube is the container that was listed for that fluid that wasn't labeled on CC's. So if it was vitreous, I'm sure it would be red, right? They usually use the same tubes for, depending on what they're testing, I would guess. I mean, I could be wrong on that, but I would think if it was vitreous fluid, if that was the fluid that they were talking about on CC's, it would have been a red top tube too, right? It said gray. I remember that. So I don't know if it was chest cavity blood or it didn't say for some reason. This is a pain having to go back up and down. Shoot. Okay, so gray top tube, spleen blood. Oh, so that's spleen blood too. So the spleen blood has a gray top tube, and so does the fluid, peripheral fluid, whatever that is. But you would think that if it was the vitreous fluid, that it probably goes in a testing tube with a red top, right? It's probably consistent as far as if there's another vitreous fluid that needs tested, wouldn't it also? I mean, wouldn't it? They have the same color of tube. I don't know. You think they would, but that I'm not 100% sure of. I guess it's not that big of a deal. I mean, regardless, even if they did have their vitreous fluid, it doesn't look like they used it to test much. So either or, I mean, they don't have any results for it. So just curious. So just looking around. So Shanann is just the spleen blood, which is just so weird that that's all that they took. That's all. Oh, wait, spleen blood. Let's see if it says gray. Gray top tube. So yeah, that must be what they put the spleen blood. Gray top tube, chest cavity blood too, so who knows. Okay, so another thing I wanted to point out is there's been a lot of talk going around that Shanann might not have really had that surgery because there was nothing listed in the autopsy about her surgery that she had on her neck. But yeah, there is actually, so I want to show you that. It is listed. Hold on a second. I don't know, maybe they're getting confused when they read the evidence of medical surgical intervention. Evidence of medical surgical intervention consists of the following: none. I believe that just means, was there some kind of intervention to try to save her before she died? You know what I'm saying? I'm pretty sure that's what that means. It doesn't mean like if she had any surgeries, period. So I'm not sure if that's something that you guys, anybody was confused on, but it does say that there was here, I'll show you. Where she did have that surgery. So right here it says spine. The spine has normal configuration. There is faintly visible hardware involving the anterior aspect of the cervical spine at the level of C6. There is no soft tissue hemorrhage or other abnormalities associated with this prior surgical site. So it's saying that they do see this prior surgical site. So I said, I'm not a doctor or anything, but to me, that is talking about the surgical site. And they're saying that there's no soft tissue hemorrhage or other abnormalities associated with this surgical site, the cervical spine. And I remember that is what she had, where she had her surgery, the cervical spine. Yeah. So she did have that surgery, guys. And then the other thing I want to bring up that I asked Dr. Salerno about is the atelectatic lung. And she said it really isn't a full collapse of the lung. That's not what that means. And she said it doesn't necessarily mean an entire collapse of the lung. It could just be like a partial collapse, or it could be something really minimal. I'll let her explain it better to you when I have her on. And it's actually, how did she say this? Let me see. She said basically that is an expected finding, and it didn't necessarily warrant a comment. It's not that surprising that they would have that result given the situation. And it probably didn't even need to be commented. So she said, yeah, it's not surprising. Remember when I was looking it up and when we were talking about it in the last live? That's what I was seeing, that it could be more of a common thing than what you would think. And it doesn't necessarily mean something real serious or something fatal. It could just be something simple. But like I said, I'll let her explain it a little bit better when she comes on. I'm not sure what the point of that is. I mean, I guess the point of that is the reenactment is she's saying that it proves that Shanann got on top of Cece basically and was... If you watch the reenactment of the creator that is saying some of this stuff, which I don't agree with most of the things that she's saying and theories that she's putting out there, but that's okay. We don't all have to agree. But if you watch her reenactment of what she thinks happened that morning, she's straddled over her. She was putting so much pressure on her ribs and her lungs. But I asked Dr. Salerno, and she said if she did have a collapsed lung because of the way that Shanann was putting her weight on her, then her ribs would have been broken. At least bruised. If not broken, at least they would have been bruised, if that was the reason why she claims that her lung collapsed. So this is her theory that Cece indeed did have a collapsed lung. So I'm just explaining, I think, what her point is of thinking that Cece's lung has collapsed and how that comes into play with her theory. Okay, so let me explain this again. So as far as the reenactment, I think what she's trying to say is that the reason that Cece has a collapsed lung because the way that Shanann was laying on her with her hand over her mouth, suffocating her with her hand, and then the way she was kind of leaning her body on her, so the pressure from both ways, from her weight and then stopping her breathing, it caused her lung to collapse, I think is what her theory is. But if that was the case, then you would probably at least see some bruising on her ribs, if not broken ribs. Dr. Salerno said, well, if her lung actually collapsed by that method, she probably would have had cracked ribs too. And there's no sign of that. So I'll let her explain it more in depth when I have her on. And then the next thing I wanted to go over is... Okay, so here's where it says Cece's lung. The lung parenchyma is dark pink tan to purple and markedly atelectatic. So, like I said, she said she'll explain more in depth when she comes on. Oh, the swab. So yeah, they did take swabs from Bella and Cece and Shanann, actually. They took swabs of face prior to washing, swabs of interior neck prior to washing, since, Chris said that Shanann basically choked them with her hands around their necks or on their face, because through that first confession, sometimes he would say smother, sometimes he would say choke. When he showed as far as what she did with her hands, it was like it was around Cece's neck, but there's multiple times where he said choke, or he agreed with his dad when his dad said she choked him. So it's not so clear, like the other creator thinks it was really clear that he said exactly what happened and that he didn't say that she choked them with her hands, but he did say that a few times. He just said different things throughout that confession because it was a lie. So he was just kind of like all over the place, and then his dad would say one thing and he'd agree, and then he would say something different. So it was just a mess. I just wanted to add that little side note because I know I'll probably get comments saying he never said that she choked Cece. Well, a couple of times he did. He did use the word choke, or he agreed to the word choke, or he showed his hands like they were around Cece's neck. And then sometimes he said smother, and then sometimes he said that he couldn't see her hands. I did actually a video on that. I'll link the video in the description because I did a video on that as far as how he went back and forth between either choking or couldn't see her hands or smothered. So I'll link that in the description. Okay, so let's go back to the autopsy. Okay, so we were talking about the swabs that they took of Bella and Cece and how that possibly could have had DNA on it if supposedly the whole theory of Shanann choking them or, you know, putting her hand over their mouth and their nose and stuff. So they would have possibly been able to get DNA because they swabbed the face and the neck. And the reason I bring this up is because there's some people saying that they didn't take these, and the reason they didn't take them is because they basically knew that they would have found Shanann's DNA, and that wouldn't go with the whole narrative of Chris doing it, because they're trying to push this false narrative that Chris did everything and when indeed that Shanann did it. And so they basically didn't take the swabs because they already had their narrative of Chris doing it, so they didn't want anything out that could have pointed to Shanann. Now, this isn't me. This is some of the theories that are out there. So I hope somebody's not tuning in at this very part and just hear this part and think that that's what my theory is. That's what I think. Absolutely not. But my point is just to show you that they did take swabs. So that's not true that they didn't take them. But chances are they probably didn't find much on the swabs because Chris killed them with a blanket over their head, so they wouldn't have had the DNA from him either choking or smothering or using his hands on their face if he had a blanket. Okay, so back to the autopsy. So swabs of face prior to washing, swabs of the anterior neck prior to washing. I would guess they probably didn't find any meaningful DNA on the swabs. And then swabs of face after washing, swabs of anterior neck after washing, swabs of bilateral hands, oral swabs, vaginal swabs, skin and fingernails from the bilateral hands. And then we have the deoxyribonucleic acid blood spot card. And then also full body x-rays. Yeah, then they took the sections of the heart, the lung, the liver, the kidney, the brain. So this is all CC. And then here's Bella. Sections of the heart, lung, liver, kidney, and brain. And then we have all this same stuff. The swabs of the neck and the face, and vaginal swabs, oral, all that stuff, and x-rays. And then got Shanann, they took, let's see, palmar surfaces of the hands, anterior and lateral neck surface, face. So I wonder if they found Chris's DNA around her neck, or... And the reason I'm just going through these specific things on the autopsy is just because some of the rumors and theories out there and the claims of stuff that just isn't true. Like, for instance, stuff that supposedly isn't in the autopsy, or supposedly that they did or didn't do in the autopsy. So I'm just pointing out those things because there was claims that they didn't take swabs of the neck. I'm just showing that, yes, they did take swabs of the neck, of the girl's neck, I should say. So basically claims that Chris wanted the swabs of the necks taken because he knew it would show Shanann's DNA, but then supposedly that they didn't have that done, like the DA or prosecutor or whatever didn't follow through and take the swabs of the neck because they're trying to cover up Shanann doing it. I'm just here to tell you that, yes, they did take swabs of the girl's neck. That's not true. It's not true that they neglected to take swabs to give this false narrative. Just in case if you're wondering why, I was just pointing out specific things. So just wanted to explain. We could go through the whole thing. We're going to go through it more in depth when I have Dr. Salerno on. So, and then as far as the discovery, I'm going to actually go through it from page 1 and go through it with you guys throughout the lives. I'll label them, in order, and we'll just go through it till we go through it all. Unless who knows, maybe when we're going through this together, more eyes on it, the better. Then maybe we'll find something, or maybe something will come out, or you never know. But yeah, I'm going to go back to the discovery and kind of go through it with y'all and see what we could find. So I think that's all that I wanted to show you on this until I actually have Dr. Salerno on, and she'll explain it a little bit more in depth, some of this stuff. But yeah, she just found it kind of odd, and I didn't even notice until she pointed it out, the fact that they're taking from different parts. Like, how you can't even compare these results because they're not even from the same thing. Like, some of it's from the chest cavity, some from the spleen, some from the liver tissue. It's not even the same. You can't even compare it. They're not comparable, and that's what she pointed out. So I didn't even notice, you know. Of course, you get a doctor looking at these results, and they look at it with a look at stuff like this in a whole different way than what a normal person would that has no medical training. So to have her perception is awesome. So I look forward to having her on. But I just wanted to go over a couple of those things, and then try to come up with some questions if you have any questions for her. So yeah, hopefully that interview will be coming up shortly, maybe in the next week or two. Hopefully we'll get her on here, and so yeah, send me some questions if you have any, guys. Alrighty, I think that's all I wanted to share with you today. Hopefully I cleared up a few things because I know I was way off on that one note. I must have missed a couple of the little details. So thanks to chatting with Dr. Salerno. She made me aware of that note and of a few things actually. So all right, guys, don't forget to send me the questions in, please. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.